Hello, scholars. Welcome to our second lesson in Westward Expansion. As you can see here, this is lesson 2A. We are splitting this lesson into two parts. I'll explain a little bit more about that in just a bit. So today, we will learn about Thomas Jefferson's vision for the future, right? Third President of the United States. We will review the land holdings in the United States in the year 1801, when he is president. And we will identify key people in the Lewis and Clark expedition. Spoiler alert, two of the people are Lewis and Clark. So let's get started. So when Thomas Jefferson is elected president, third president of the United States, he thought there were some advantages, some good things to the idea of Americans moving west. So if you take a quick look at this map, right, this box area shows you mostly, right, the United States at the time of Thomas Jefferson's presidency. He's looking at the idea that expanding, right, moving west, people moving west, the U.S. owning the land to the west would be a really great idea. Here are some of those advantages he was thinking about. First, it would make the country safer from foreign invasion if the United States owns all the land. Foreign invasion means, right, an attack from another country. So if you think about the United States map of today, right, if we own land to the west, where those red arrows are, all the way to the Pacific Ocean, then we're owning that land from ocean to ocean. Another country doesn't have that land. It's going to be harder to attack our land from the water. He also thought owning that land to the west, on the other side of the Mississippi River, would secure trading along the river, strong trading as a matter of fact, meaning that the United States would have really a monopoly on the use of that river, and then any trading that you can do. Now you might be thinking, trading along that river? Scholars, if you look at this map, right, and you think about anything that's going on up here in this area, right, fur trapping, right, beaver furs, remember, are quite the rage. So any furs that you're getting, right, you can send down the Missouri River, right, down the Mississippi River here, right, connects to the Gulf of Mexico, which connects to the Atlantic Ocean to send those furs over to Europe for trading. So if you have control of that river, you have control of the fur trade. He also thought another advantage would be it would give the nation, right, the United States, room to grow for generations, right, in the future. The population is growing, right? The more people who are living in the United States in 1801, the more the population is going to grow, right? As those people have children, those children grow up and have children. And he realized space was needed for this growing population. Now, before we go any further with his idea, right, his quest for the United States to own that land, to expand to the west, let's take a quick review of just the different nations, the different countries that have territories, land holdings in what is today the United States, but in 1801. So Spain claimed what is today Florida, Texas, and much of the southwest United States of today. But Spain gave Louisiana, a very large territory at that time, back to France as a thank you, right, for help that France had given Spain. I'll show you a map of that in just a moment. France and Spain in 1801 controlled the trading rights along the Mississippi River and the French port city of New Orleans, which is located where the Mississippi River meets the Gulf of Mexico. Let's take a look at that on a map. So this red triangle kind of gives you, right, the main look of the United States in around 1801. So it was established, remember, broke away officially. The Treaty of Paris recognized the United States as independent in 1783, right? So Spain has claims on what is today Florida. It's claiming Texas, which later, right, 1845, you'll hear more about Texas later in our study. Spain in 1801 owns this chunk of land that is going to go to Mexico. You'll hear more about that later. And this area in green really had kind of been left alone. You'll hear a little later about how both Britain and the United States have claims on that, as well as Spain. Right? So you'll hear more about that chunk of land a little bit later. This purple chunk is the Louisiana Territory that I just mentioned. So Spain had that land. They gave it back to France as kind of payback for France helping Spain. So we're going to hear about how each of these parts becomes a part of the United States, right? This idea that Thomas Jefferson has of expanding to the west is going to take us from, right, the Atlantic Ocean over here to the Pacific Ocean over here, right? Owning that land, right, from ocean to ocean. So step one of his plan is to get that purple triangle area. Let me back up and show that to you again, right? So he is thinking, sorry, I shouldn't say the purple triangle area. He's thinking right down, right about in here is the port city of New Orleans, right? So that French port city, a major stop in trade, right? If you're sending things down the Mississippi River through New Orleans to the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean, that's a pretty major city for trade. So President Jefferson got permission from Congress to purchase that port city of New Orleans from France. Here you can see it in red, right, on that map. Can you see why the United States would want this port city? I kind of mentioned it already, didn't I? If you're sending anything for trade, right, fur trade, anything else that you're sending over for trade, right, you can send it down the Mississippi River, you can send it down the Missouri River, you can send it down the Ohio River. All of those connect their tributaries to the Mississippi River, which again passes through New Orleans to the Gulf of Mexico, and then through the Atlantic Ocean, across the Atlantic Ocean to Europe. So definitely a good city to have control of. So Congress says yes to President Jefferson to negotiate to buy that port city. So when Congress agreed to it, when they approved it, said yes to it, right, they said that the United States could spend $9 million to purchase New Orleans. They sent Robert Livingston to France to make the deal. Now, Robert Livingston gets there. He's negotiating. As he's negotiating, it seems France needed some money, however. They were in debt from some wars, in need of money. So instead of agreeing to sell New Orleans for $9 million, this need for money, they actually offered to sell the United States the entire Louisiana Territory, not just New Orleans. Think about that. Let's put that in context of school for a moment. Imagine, right, your classroom, your teacher going to Miss Tuzinok and saying, we would like to buy the classroom next to us so we can expand our classroom, have a little more space. Maybe we have an area of the room to do our reading work, and a different area that we can do our math work, right? And Miss Tuzinok saying, you know what? I have an even better idea. What if I offer to sell you 4 classrooms instead of just 1 more. It'd be hard not to turn down that deal. It'd be hard to turn down that deal, wouldn't it? So here's Robert Livingston. He's been approved to spend $9 million to buy New Orleans, a port city, and France saying, hey, what about buying the whole Louisiana territory? But there was a little catch to the deal. France wanted $15 million. They said, yeah, we'll sell you the whole Louisiana territory, but not for the $9 million that you were offering just for New Orleans. We'll sell you the whole Louisiana territory, but the price is $15 million. What would you do if you were Robert Livingston? What would you do if your teacher had approved you to spend a certain amount to get 1 more classroom, and there you are, negotiating with Ms. Tuzon? She's offering you more than 1 classroom, but the price is higher. Now, you might think, well, Robert Livingston probably figured out a way to contact, Congress and President Jefferson. But remember, it doesn't work like that in 1801, He can't quickly send an email or pick up a cell phone and say, yo, Jefferson, this is what France is thinking, He's in the moment. He feels like he needs to take advantage of this. So he says yes to the deal. He agrees to pay the $15 million without actually checking with Thomas Jefferson or Congress to see if they are okay with it. So he says yes to spending $6 million more than he's been approved to spend. So the question is, were they mad at him then? What do you think? Well, no, they were not. It ended up being worth it because it doubled the size of the United States and gave the United States control of the Mississippi River and New Orleans. So yes, they had only approved $9 million to get that port city, but now they got that port city, got control of the Mississippi River, got enough land to double the size of the United States. And yes, they did have to spend $6 million more, but they actually ended up being okay with it. So here's a look at that Louisiana territory in purple. That's what they purchased for $15 million. So the United States now owned this territory, but they did not know very much about that territory. Again, just imagine that for a moment. Imagine agreeing to buy something that you really don't know what you were buying, what you were getting, what that involved. So they knew they were happy about it because they got that port city of New Orleans. They were happy about it because it gave them control of the Mississippi River. And they were happy because it doubled the size of the United States. But they have no other thing to know about it, to appreciate about it, to know if that was good. So President Jefferson decided he needed someone on an expedition to check out their new property. He needed to send a team, a crew, out to explore, check out this land, see what the soil's like, what the terrain is is it mountainous? Are there lots of lakes, rivers? Are there indigenous people living there? Are they friendly? Will they be helpful? What kind of animals? What kind of plants? There's a lot to know, to learn about their new land, this new territory. So when he decides that, he hires Meriwether Lewis to explore the new land that the United States had just purchased. Now, Meriwether Lewis had been secretary to Thomas Jefferson, so this is a person Thomas Jefferson knew. Lewis had served as a captain in the United States Army on the frontier, so he's familiar, with unexplored areas, territories. He was familiar with the wilderness, with the culture of some of the indigenous people in the area closer to the Mississippi River, not so much as they expanded out, but he had some familiarity with other cultures. He was strong, he was brave, he was curious. Those are good things to have in a person who's exploring an unknown land. He also was quite familiar with math, geography, nature, and science. Again, that's someone you want when you're sending someone around in an unknown land, right, to learn about the geography of that land, to see what natural things are there, right, the animals, the plant life, knowing some things about science and math, right, doing some mapping. So, great man for the job. Meriwether Lewis wanted someone to help him with this task. He chose William Clark to share the responsibilities of this expedition of the new land. Now, interestingly, scholars, Clark asked him to join as an equal partner. So when he was hired to join him, he asked to be equally in charge, co-leading the men that they would get on their crew. Congress said no to that they would only hire Lewis to be in charge, and that Clark would be sort of under him, second in command, but under him, not equal. What I find interesting about that, scholars, is that Lewis and Clark never tell the rest of the crew members about that. So the crew spends this entire trip, this entire expedition, thinking that Lewis and Clark are co-leaders, equal partners, as they explore this new territory. Also interesting to know is William Clark has some knowledge about keel boats. You'll hear more about what that means and how that ties in, but he had made them in the Army. He knew some things about sailing them on rivers. So that's going to come in useful. You'll hear why a little later. A couple other people that are important to this trip. A man named York, he was called York, his name was Ben York, also came along on the Lewis and Clark expedition. He, York, grew up with Clark as Clark's lifelong enslaved companion. York had been bequeathed or given to William Clark by William Clark's father when he was on his deathbed. York was large, athletic, and the indigenous people that you'll hear about them meeting along the way on their journey, on their expedition, loved him. They were fascinated by him. They had not seen a person from Africa before. So they found him quite fascinating, quite interesting. York became really a good connection, right? A good sort of meeting point, right? Point of communication, of interest between the Lewis and Clark crew and the indigenous people that they're going to meet during the journey. Also along on the journey, a little bit later, you'll hear about her joining, is Sacagawea. So partway through the journey, Sacagawea joins them. You'll hear more about it, but she was born a Shoshone Indian, right, into the indigenous tribe of the Shoshone people. She was kidnapped at age 11 by the Hidatsa people, another indigenous tribe. The Hidatsa people sold her to the Mandan indigenous people. Then later, a French fur trapper named Toussaint Charbonneau won Sacagawea in a bet with indigenous warriors. Let's just think about this for a moment. So she's born a member of the Shoshone tribe. She gets kidnapped at age 11 by another tribe, the Hidatsa people. Later, the Hidatsa people sell her to the Mandan people. Then a time after that, she's placed as part of a bet. Right? If you've ever bet somebody with something, a person is being bet. And this French fur trapper named Toussaint Charbonneau wins her in the bet. That's quite a life for someone who ends up being a very important part of this journey. She will later, you'll hear, become an interpreter for Lewis and Clark and help guide them on the journey. We'll hear much more about her in our second part. So scholars, that's going to be it for today. I wanted to introduce you to 4 really key people in the Lewis and Clark expedition, right? Meriwether Lewis, William Clark, York, right? Clark's enslaved companion, and Sacagawea. In the next lesson, we are going to learn about the expedition itself that these 4 people are on with some other people. We're going to hear about them exploring this newly purchased land, the Louisiana Territory. So checking back on what we talked about today, we learned about Thomas Jefferson's vision for the future, right? His ideas that were why it was important for the United States to expand west, right? What were the advantages of doing that? We also checked in and reviewed the land holdings that the United States had in 1801, as well as land holdings that other countries had in what would become the United States. And you identified those 4 key people in the Lewis and Clark expedition. Now your task is to open that attached Google form, answer the 5 questions about today's lesson. You may look back at the lesson for help, review things in this video. Remember, when you're finished, click that submit button at the bottom of the form. That is what sends your answers to your teacher. Good luck, scholars. Thanks for joining me. And next class, we check out the expedition itself. It's pretty exciting. Thanks for joining me. Good luck with your questions.